I stood frozen as they laughed over her head, their voices sharp and careless, treating her as if she were a chair in her own living room. The words cut deeper than I expected, slicing through the air with a cruelty she refused to acknowledge. I could feel her presence beside me, steady and composed, but my own stomach twisted with anger I couldn't yet release. I watched my auntie smile politely while they divided credit, profits, and praise that rightfully belonged to her. Her lips curved into a practiced expression, but her eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of pain. Every handshake they exchanged, every nod of acknowledgement they shared was meant for her, yet she received nothing. I felt it in my bones, how invisible they thought she was. I felt my chest burn when one of them said, "She's lucky to be included," as if generosity alone was her reward. The words were loud, cruel, and deliberate. I could see the smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. Lucky. Not talented. Not visionary. Lucky. My heart pounded as I struggled to keep my voice from breaking. I remembered the sound of silverware clinking against glasses while they toasted themselves using her work. Each cheer was like a hammer, driving the humiliation deeper. The metallic chime of cutlery became a reminder of stolen moments, stolen recognition, stolen dignity. She raised her glass politely, and I could feel the weight of her restraint pressing down on me. I saw phones come out, selfies taken, captions typed, all erasing her existence completely. They documented her labor, her ideas, her nights of sacrifice, as if they had created it. She laughed softly, a sound that didn't reach her eyes, and I knew she hated every second of it. I wanted to grab the phones, smash them, yell that this was her. This was always hers. I noticed how she adjusted her cardigan, that small, nervous habit she had when she felt cornered, wrapping herself in it as if it could shield her from their greed. Every fold she straightened seemed like an apology she didn't owe. I hated that they had forced her into shrinking, into caution. I felt the humiliation deepen when they asked her to pour drinks instead of joining the discussion. She bent slightly, moving toward the tray, her dignity a silent protest that went unheeded. My fists clenched as I realized they thought this small act would define her, like her worth could be measured by obedience. I heard my own voice stay silent, trapped by fear, by caution, by the knowledge that one wrong word could make this worse for her. I hated my own hesitation, the way my body betrayed my desire to defend her. But I also understood that this was bigger than a single shout. It was a storm she had endured many times before. I sensed the room's power imbalance like a physical weight pressing down on us. Every chair leaned in their favor, every smile was armor, every glance a claim on her work. I could feel the injustice as if it were gravity, pinning me, making it impossible to move. I realized they believed she would never push back, that her kindness and endurance were weaknesses to exploit. They didn't know her patience was a weapon, that every quiet nod, every soft-spoken agreement was calculated, storing power for the moment it would matter most. I saw her eyes flick toward me, a warning, a silent plea. Do not intervene. Not yet. Her restraint was more powerful than my impulse. I nodded slightly, understanding that this was her battle, not mine, and that watching, waiting, would matter more than anything I could say. I knew this moment would change everything. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes revelation, the kind that precedes retribution. I felt it in the tremor of my fingers, the tightening of my jaw, the flare of determination in my chest. Something had shifted, and I knew the quiet storm she carried inside was about to break. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. I remembered how my auntie raised me when no one else stepped in. Not with speeches or promises, but with her body moving before her mouth ever did. She showed up. Every time. When the world decided I wasn't worth the effort, she decided I was. Her hands were always busy. Working, cleaning, fixing. Yet they still found time to steady my shoulders when I felt like I was falling apart. I recalled nights when she skipped meals so I could eat. I didn't know it then. I only remember her pushing the plate toward me, smiling, saying she wasn't hungry. Years later, the memory tastes bitter. I see her sitting with a cup of tea while I ate until I was full, pretending sacrifice was preference. That was her pattern. Erase herself so I could exist comfortably. I thought about how she built her reputation quietly, without connections or favors. No shortcuts, no powerful last names, just consistency, early mornings and late nights that ended with sore feet and unanswered messages. People didn't notice her because she didn't demand to be noticed. She believed good work spoke for itself. She didn't realize how many people were hard of hearing when it came to gratitude. I remembered her teaching me that dignity meant endurance, not silence. She used to say it softly, like advice passed down from a place of survival. "Hold your head up," she'd tell me. "You don't need to shout to be strong." I didn't understand then that she had confused endurance with endurance of harm. That lesson kept her standing, but it also kept her exposed. I saw flashbacks of her first business idea being dismissed as cute. That word still burns. Cute. Said with a smile that meant small, harmless, unthreatening. I remember her nodding, laughing along, shrinking her own vision so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I remember how she came home that night quieter than usual, folding her jacket over a chair like it weighed more than it should. I remembered how she signed contracts she barely understood because she trusted people. She believed eye contact meant honesty. She believed handshakes were binding. She believed that if someone spoke confidently, they must be right. I didn't know then how dangerous trust could be when it's given without armor. I recalled how she celebrated small wins alone, never asking for applause. She'd pour herself a cheap drink, sit at the kitchen table, and allow herself one small smile before putting the mask back on. No announcements, no posts, just a moment of quiet pride she never thought to share. The world never applauded her because it never saw her clapping for herself. I remembered the first time she was betrayed by a partner she'd defended publicly. I can still hear her voice, steady and loyal, vouching for someone who had already decided to use her. When the truth came out, she didn't rage. She didn't expose them. She blamed herself. That was the moment something dangerous settled into her bones, the belief that betrayal was a personal failure. I realized this pattern of being used had followed her for years. Different faces, same outcome. They took her ideas, her labor, her patience, and called it collaboration. They praised her loyalty while emptying her pockets, and every time she told herself it was just how things worked. I remembered her telling me that being kind was safer than being powerful. She said power scared people. Kindness made them stay. I see now how that belief kept her surrounded, and surrounded by the wrong ones. People who stay because you're kind rarely stay when you become strong. I saw how her past made her believe exploitation was the price of belonging. That if she gave enough, sacrificed enough, endured enough, she'd earn a seat that was never meant to be taken away. She didn't realize some people only invite you in to see how much they can take before you notice. I felt guilt for benefiting from her strength without protecting her sooner. I grew on the foundation she laid while she kept standing in the storm alone. I carry that weight with me, the knowledge that her silence raised me and my delay cost her years. But I also carry something else now, the certainty that everything they took from her was built by her hands, and one day, she would remember that too. I watched them increase their demands while offering her less, each request sharper than the last, each expectation heavier than she could bear. They acted like her time and effort were infinite, as if the hours she poured into their plans were theirs to take. I felt the sting of injustice in every glance they threw her way. I noticed her name disappearing from emails and meeting invites. First a subtle omission, then glaringly obvious. Every notification that didn't include her felt like a punch to the chest. They were erasing her existence, piece by piece, while she continued to act like nothing had changed. I heard excuses about efficiency and branding, carefully crafted words that cloaked exclusion as strategy. She sat through them, nodding politely, though the flicker of disbelief in her eyes betrayed the weight of their betrayal. "It's nothing personal," they said, but every word whispered the opposite. I saw her work longer hours while they left early, heels clicking against empty floors, lights shutting off behind them, leaving her in silence and fluorescent glare. Every night, her desk was stacked with the remnants of their plans, her blood, sweat, and ideas stolen under the guise of teamwork. I felt anger build as they used her resources without permission. Her contacts, her files, her designs, manipulated, rebranded, repurposed. like she had no claim to them at all. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to rip the papers from their hands, but I stayed silent, letting her strategy unfold in her own time. I noticed subtle insults disguised as jokes during strategy meetings. "Oh, maybe we should ask her opinion." They'd smirk, laughter punctuating the dismissal. Each comment was a carefully placed dagger, and I could see her swallow back frustration, folding it into a stoic mask that hid years of exhaustion. I watched her defend them even when they undermined her. She spoke up for decisions that stole from her, justified actions that diminished her, and shielded them from consequences they deserved. Every word she uttered was heavy with restraint, and I could feel my own blood boil with helpless rage. I realized they were preparing to cut her out completely. The signs were undeniable. Decisions made behind closed doors, resources redirected, credit systematically erased. They assumed her loyalty meant silence, that her patience meant submission. They were counting on her to disappear quietly. I overheard a whispered plan that confirmed my worst fear. Names, figures, intentions. Every word a blueprint for betrayal. My stomach twisted as the full picture sank in. They were about to take everything she had built and pretend she had never existed. I saw her hands tremble when she read the revised agreement. Pages in her hands, signatures she had been asked to sign, words she hadn't written, numbers that weren't hers. The tremor wasn't weakness. It was the slow burn of someone who had endured too much and finally felt the weight of it all. I felt the tension peak as she considered signing it again, a decision that could cost her everything she had fought for. I could almost hear the heartbeat in the silence, a drumbeat of fear and calculation. Every second stretched, every breath measured. I knew something had to break. The air vibrated with the promise of change, the quiet before the storm. She had endured for too long. She had been patient, loyal, invisible. And now I could see the spark in her eyes, the moment she decided that enough was enough, and when she acted, nothing would ever be the same. It was just past midnight when my phone rang, the screen flashing a name I hadn't expected. The voice on the other end was tight, hurried, and full of urgency. "I think you need to see this," they said. And in that moment, I knew the balance of power was about to shift. I listened as a former associate revealed documents they had hidden. Files that proved years of manipulation, misdirection, and theft. Each page they described made my stomach knot tighter. Contracts, emails, ownership papers. They'd assumed these were buried, inaccessible, irrelevant. They had been wrong. I realized my auntie legally owned far more than they had ever admitted. Numbers she had never been shown, percentages they had altered on purpose, rights they had pretended belonged to them. It was all hers. And suddenly, their empire of control was built on lies. The next day, I saw fear replace confidence in their voices during a sudden meeting. The tone of the room shifted instantly. Smiles vanished. Hands that had been steady were now fidgeting. The people who had laughed over her head were no longer laughing. They were cornered. I watched my auntie stop apologizing mid-sentence. For the first time, she didn't bow, didn't soften, didn't excuse herself. She paused, looked them directly in the eye, and let silence hang like a storm cloud. It was enough. The room shifted again, imperceptibly but irrevocably. I felt the shift when she asked for silence and took control of the room. Her voice, calm and measured, commanded attention. "Let's go over the facts," she said. And suddenly, every lie, every omission, every manipulation was exposed by her presence alone. I saw her lay out facts they assumed she never understood. Percentages, contracts, timelines, each revealed with precision, each word cutting through the bravado they had relied on. Their assumptions of her naivety crumbled in real time. I realized they had underestimated her intelligence and patience. Years of quiet endurance had been mistaken for weakness, compliance for ignorance. But she had studied, remembered, and waited. And now the waiting had ended. I noticed them scrambling for leverage that no longer existed. They fumbled with documents, tried to interject, attempted to create distractions, but every tactic fell flat. She had the proof, the law, and the moral high ground. They had nothing. I felt pride surge as she stood taller than I had ever seen. There was a shift in her posture, a spark in her eyes, a rhythm in her voice that demanded recognition and respect. She was no longer just enduring. She was asserting herself with a power they couldn't touch. I understood this was no longer about survival, but reckoning. The scales had tilted. The people who had exploited her for years were now on the defensive. She had waited long enough, and now justice would be delivered. I knew the next move would be decisive. Every word, every gesture, every document laid before them was calculated, precise, and unstoppable. The room held its breath, knowing that nothing after this would ever be the same. I sat beside her as she presented evidence to the investors they had relied on for years, her hands steady, her eyes focused. Every document she laid out told a story they had tried to bury. Contracts, correspondences, proof of ownership, they couldn't deny what they had ignored for so long. I watched color drain from their faces as the contracts were read aloud. Confidence turned to confusion, smugness into panic. The air in the room thickened with tension, every whispered excuse evaporating under the weight of truth. I heard the room fall silent when ownership percentages were revealed. Numbers once manipulated and hidden were laid bare. Gasps and stuttered questions filled the space, but the facts were immutable. They could not argue, could not spin, could not escape. I saw their public image fracture in real time. Investors exchanged worried glances. Allies murmured doubts. The empire they had built on deception was cracking, and no one could prop it up. I felt the subtle thrill of justice finally taking shape. I watched my auntie reclaim her narrative without raising her voice. Every word, every gesture was measured yet commanding. She didn't need to shout. The room bent to the weight of her truth, and for the first time, her patience became visible power. I felt satisfaction when legal counsel confirmed her position. A nod here, a quiet affirmation there, and the room finally understood. She was untouchable, rightful owner of what they had tried to steal. Their schemes dissolved under the cold logic of law and fact. I saw them attempt emotional manipulation that no longer worked. Pleas, insinuations, attempts to guilt her into compromise, all fell flat. The patience they had assumed meant weakness now radiated as strength, impermeable and undeniable. I heard my auntie state her terms calmly and without hesitation. Everything reverts to my control, she said. No exceptions, no delays. Her voice held the finality of a verdict, and there was no room for debate. I watched as assets, accounts, and rights transferred back to her, one by one. The room became a theater of reversal, their prior authority dissolving with each signature, each confirmation. The weight of stolen years lifted in tangible, irrevocable measures. I felt the weight lift when consequences finally landed. Every deceit, every betrayal, every attempt to diminish her now bore fruit as justice. The tension that had clung to us for years finally released, leaving clarity and satisfaction in its place. I saw them leave the room stripped of authority, their power evaporated by facts and unshakable resolve. No apologies, no excuses, just the quiet exit of those who had overstepped for too long. I realized revenge didn't require cruelty, only clarity. Patience, precision, and the unwavering belief in her worth had done what anger could not. She had endured, waited, and finally claimed what was always hers. And in that moment, I understood the true power of justice executed with dignity. I watched my auntie walk out with everything she had built fully restored. Her steps steady, purposeful, as if each one carried the weight of years she had endured silently. There was no rush, no need to prove anything, just the quiet confidence of someone reclaiming what was always theirs. I saw relief soften her face for the first time in years. The tension that had carved lines into her features eased, and her eyes finally held a light I hadn't seen since I was a child. It was a release so deep, it felt almost sacred. I noticed how quiet the world felt without constant pressure. The air seemed lighter, less oppressive, as if the walls that had once constrained her creativity and spirit had been removed. Every sound, every step, felt charged with new possibility. I helped her sort through messages from people suddenly apologizing, their words clumsy and belated, trying to mend bridges after the fact. She read them with a calm detachment, letting the apologies wash over her without allowing them to define her worth. I saw her decline reconciliation that came too late. The offers, the gestures, the attempts to reclaim her favor. She smiled softly, shook her head, and moved on. Her dignity was intact, untouchable, and she had no need to validate anyone else's tardy remorse. I realized she no longer needed validation from anyone. Years of proving herself, defending her work, enduring exploitation. It was all behind her now. Her strength had become self-evident, requiring no audience, no applause. I watched her reinvest in herself instead of appeasing others. She planned, created, and expanded, not to please anyone, but to honor her vision. Every decision was deliberate, every effort infused with purpose and pride. I felt our roles shift as she finally rested. The caretaker had become the cared for. The protector could finally exhale. The cycle of vigilance and endurance had ended, and I could witness her peace without guilt or fear. I saw her laugh freely, unafraid of being replaced, unshackled from the fear of exploitation. The sound was bright, pure, and contagious. It filled the room and lingered in the corners of memory, a declaration that she was untouchable. I understood that justice wasn't loud but permanent. It didn't need dramatics or vengeance. Clarity, patience, and truth had restored balance. The impact was enduring, undeniable, and irrevocable. I felt gratitude for witnessing her transformation, for seeing the woman who had endured so much finally emerge whole, confident, and untethered. It was a privilege I would carry forever. I knew her story would protect others. Every lesson, every stand she took, every quiet moment of courage would ripple outward. People would learn to recognize their worth, to wait for clarity, to demand justice without compromise. And in that, her legacy became unbreakable. I reflect on how kindness without boundaries invites exploitation. I've watched it unfold, seen it take the strongest, most generous people and reduce them to shadows of themselves. Kindness is a gift, but without limits, it becomes a weapon in the hands of the unworthy. I think about how silence can be mistaken for weakness. I remember her quiet endurance, the way she never raised her voice, never demanded attention. They assumed patience was compliance, generosity was consent. They were wrong. I realize power often returns when you stop asking for permission. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She waited. She prepared, and she claimed what was always hers. Power doesn't need an invitation. It only requires recognition of your own right to hold it. I speak directly about recognizing your worth before others do. Too often, we wait for the world to validate us. Too often, we hand over control because we fear conflict. But your value exists independent of applause or acknowledgement. Protect it, claim it, defend it. I share how watching her changed my definition of strength. Strength isn't loud. It isn't reactive. It is measured, patient, and exacting. Strength is knowing your worth, enduring injustice, and striking at the precise moment when your victory cannot be denied. I remind myself that patience can be strategic, not passive. Waiting doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation, observation, understanding when the moment is right to act, and then acting with clarity that leaves no room for challenge. I acknowledge the cost of waiting too long to speak up. I see the years lost, the opportunities stolen, the confidence eroded. And yet, I also see that even delayed action, when precise, can rewrite the story entirely. I invite listeners to examine who benefits from their labor, who takes credit for your work, who uses your time, energy, and loyalty without consequence. Awareness is the first step toward reclaiming control. I emphasize that walking away can mean winning everything. Sometimes, the ultimate power is knowing when to remove yourself from manipulation, reclaim your dignity, and let the consequences fall where they may. I leave with the image of her closing the door behind her. That moment, quiet, final, complete, is the epitome of reclaiming what was stolen. The door clicks shut, and nothing taken can return. I ask the audience to reflect on who they're protecting. Are you safeguarding the right people, the right values, your own interests, or someone else's illusion of control? I end by encouraging viewers to claim what's already theirs. Stop waiting for permission. Stop shrinking to fit expectations. Stand, reclaim, and let the world recognize the power you've always carried. The victory is already yours. You only need to take it.